Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Streaming Alchemy. I'm John Mahoney, and on today's show, we're going to look at how you can create a fairly sophisticated, layered player introduction screen where a team could show the multiple players that will be playing in a game. And this involves a couple of new shortcuts that we haven't used before, which allow you to add and remove inputs dynamically from a vMix preset. So before we get into that, I'd like to, first welcome everybody. If you would like to join us on the show, you can either ask a question in the comment section, or you can join us by calling in, and we can bring you on air, and we can have a conversation here on air. So let me very quickly show you what we'd like to cover in this show, and then I'll get into some of the comments because we have a number of people that have already commented. So I want to make sure we get to that before we dive in deeper. So let me show you. This is the output right now. And what I wanted to create was something where you could have a player card sort of sitting up on the screen, an overlay with text data about that player, and in the background have a video playing sort of that player or related to that player. And then when I wanted to go through to the next player, I can simply hit a button and a card sort of flips onto the screen and all of these elements change. So this is basically what we'll cover how to create on today's show. And I think it could, have multiple uses besides sports. You could do this, for any type of event where you have different speakers or whatever, and do something very similar. And it doesn't have to have all the sports framing around it that we have here for this one, but hopefully this will give you an idea. So before we get into how we're doing all this, let me go over to our comment section. And I know we have a number. So we have Spatial. Thank you very much. I always appreciate the well wishes, and I'm moving ahead. I'm getting better now and starting to feel better. So hopefully everything's on the right trajectory there. Kyle, hello. Thank you for joining us, Kyle. Good to see you here. Jim Bob Shogun. Jim Bob is asking about an alternative from scripting to vMix UTC. So I definitely understand, that some of the topics we cover on scripting are not always clear, and a part of that is definitely my inability to explain it in a simpler way sometimes. But I will definitely keep in mind, I know about vMix UTC. I don't really know it. I haven't used it. There is another stream on YouTube called One Man Stream that covers UTC specifically, but I'll definitely look where it may make sense to introduce some topics for things that UTC would be able to do, that I don't necessarily have to go to scripting to do. So thank you for asking that. Tom, good to see you here, Tom. Thank you for joining. Really appreciate it. Marco, good to have you back. Thank you for joining. Michael, always good to see you. Thank you. You the man. Thank you. Good to have you here, you. Great to see you. Walter from Amsterdam. Thank you for joining, Walter. I appreciate it. John, happy August back to you. Thank you. Hakan from Stockholm, Sweden. Thank you very much for joining. Okay. Chuyahogus. I'm sorry if I butchered your name. I really apologize. Thank you for joining in. Thank you for the well wishes from everybody that has, asked after me over this past couple of months. I definitely appreciate that. Okay, so let's dig in a little bit, and probably the first place to do is let's look at the vMix preset, and I'll sort of describe the framework that we're using to do this. So There were a few things. So first, I just have sort of, if we just go across, I have my standard camera shot over here. So this would be sort of whoever is, you know, doing the play-by-play or, you know, the color commentary. That would be the person that's there. And that would just be a normal camera. And then if you look at sort of the elements that we have here, we have here a football field that's sort of moving across, and that's this field here. And then on top of that, we have sort of these lights that are flickering in from the sides to create that sort of softening effect on everything that's there. And that is, you know, so these two together are basically just layered. And I'll talk about where we do that. And that gives you sort of that background that we play this video here on top of. And that we have the deck of cards that are sort of sitting over here. That sort of creates that whole background for that. Then one of the things I did here is, in order to create a sense that we have a stack of sort of playing cards here, which is sort of the way, you know, player sports cards, that allows me to do sort of that flip out effect. What I have is I have a background which sort of looks like a stack of cards, and that's what we're using sort of in the composite. We also have a mask, which it seems doesn't really work the way I thought it should, and I'll talk a bit about that, but it's something that I was using inside of one of the mixes that I have for this video, and that was supposed to sort of soften all these edges out, but it doesn't seem to work exactly the way I was expecting. So I'll touch on that in a little bit. And then one of the things, if you notice, when I move between, so sort of look here at the preview, at the program out, if I move between cards with the different players, I turn off the background video and then I fade it back in once I switch to the new text. And so I am doing that using this mix 2 here inside of vMix. And so I have the player video that I will use, and I also have just a blank. So when I can fade out, I just go to this blank so there's no video showing. I load the new video, then fade that in. And that's how we do it to create that background video of the player playing. Now, here are the sort of the actual core of how all of this functionality is working. So because I have sort of a player that is active now, this is the current player, and then I have a next player, so I call them sort of current card and next card. Those are these two cards. So card 1 is the current card, and card 2 is the next card. And in order to do this, I need to have data sources set up, and all of these data sources are being driven out of an Excel spreadsheet, but I have to use multiple copies of it. Now, I'll go into that right after I finish going through the preset here, but these are driven by two separate data sources, one that I track for the current card and one that I track for the next card. And so that's how I have that here. And then what you see happening with the flipping of the card coming onto another card. So when I just sort of go that next, you get that view of the card sort of flipping over onto the deck. That's done with these two inputs here. So in deck 1, so let me sort of open this up so you can see. If I look at the layers, all of these layers are pretty much identical. I have, you know, all the lights and the field background. I have that player video. I have that stack of cards, sort of that blank stack underneath, so it looks like I'm layering cards in. And then I have card 1, which is the current card, the current player card, and card 2, which is the next player card. Except in deck 1, card 2, if you look, it's set up so it's really zoomed out and it's off to the side and it's got some rotation. So if you sort of go through here and look, I have sort of a rotation on the Y, which gives it that effect where when I have that, the card isn't on screen and it's way big and it's sort of off to the side. But if I go to deck 2, so let me just do that. Deck 2 basically looks almost identical. So if I go to the layers, they're all the exact same layers, except in card 2 is now positioned onto the deck, and it's layering right over card 1. So it creates sort of a total replacement for whatever is on card 1. And the way we do the flip is using our friend the merge function. So what I do is I get the right players in card 1 and in deck 1 and deck 2. So that's my card 1, card 2. And then when I merge between deck 1 and deck 2, that transition happens where visually that card that's big and off to the side now shrinks and flips onto the deck, covering card 1. So I get the first and then the next card. And that gives you that effect. And we deal with that in scripting so that we can simplify how these go back and forth. So we can always have a easy flip. And I'll show you that when we go through the script. And then we have the player overlay, which is the detail that we're reading from our Excel spreadsheet and displaying about the current player. And then the last thing, which is really the new functionality that we're sort of introducing in today's show, this is the video of that player that is currently selected. And if you look here, if I were to go to the next card, you'll see that, looking down here, it closes that, and I load the new video and add that as the input. So I'm not stacking up all these inputs. And I'm taking and reading that. And I'm reading the file name and the file directory from the Excel data source. And I'm using that to open up this input. And so that means that I could put any video file out there that I want for these players and then just bring that in behind each one of the players, and it's all driven by data. And this is one of the things that you get where normally inside of a GT title, you don't have the ability to embed video. That's not one of the capabilities in GT title at this point. So this gives you a mechanism to do that just in layering. So now when I create this composited view, I get effectively a dynamic title that I can read out that corresponds to what Data Source Manager and the sort of the binding to the title with the text overlays and the binding of the images to the cards. All those things are done traditionally through, GT title, Data Sources Manager, and doing the title editor inside of the vMix preset. So those things combine and make that happen. But here, this gives you the ability now to also dynamically insert a video into what you're displaying on screen. So that can be very, very useful for a lot of different applications that you may want to do here. So I think let's see. Let me talk a little bit about Data Sources Manager, because this is the other piece that was important. When you are working with a data source, you have a limitation that you can only be accessing one row of data at a time. You sort of can point to that and say, this is the active data that I want to use. And so in order to deal with this and make this simpler, especially simpler around scripting, what I ended up doing is if you go to Data Source Manager, what I did is I took the exact same data source. So this is just, I'm reading in my Excel spreadsheet and using that as my baseline for all my data. And I'm doing that 3 times. But what this lets me do is now I can set up my row position for card 1, my row position for card 2, because all those things we're doing that sort of in the background here. So if we are, when we have the 2 decks set up with card 1, card 2, this allows me to simply say, which player do I want as my current player? Which player do I want as my next player? And if you sort of see the way this is set up right now, player 7 is the current and player 8 is set as the next. And then I do this as the overlay, so that gives me the ability to sort of set things up where and there's reasons for doing this in the scripting, where I can control what text is being displayed separately from the card, because there's real compelling reasons to do that right now. And so that's how we're basically setting this up. So we have the one data set, but described now as 3 different data sources that we can control independently to select the rows and populate everything we need. So if we look at the data that's inside of here, it's pretty much, this is just coming out where I have the core details. Then I have the team logo. So that's the sort of the little logos that you see sitting here and sitting there. That's just saying what logo am I using for the team. And then I have the player video directory and the player video file. And the reason I separated these is the function that we use to load a new input into vMix. When it loads an input, I give it the full description to say the player video directory and the player video file. But the name of the input is the name of the file. So what this lets me do without having to do sort of parsing text strings, by separating them to the directory and the file name, it means that I can simply use the player video file anytime I want to refer to that input. And all the things I do in scripting talking about that input simply use the name. So I can say input : equals and player video, the player file name. So I think it's called video file in the script. So that gives me an easy way to do that without trying to parse through a lot of text. And that's why I split it up. And then we just have the blurb that's sort of sitting over the player. So this is all the data that we have set up, and this is how it's all structured inside the preset. So hopefully all that sort of as a baseline makes sense. So let me see. I want to see if we have anybody else from the comments. So ABC, thank you for joining from India. Definitely appreciate it. Thank you. Okay, so I guess the next thing to do would probably be, let's jump into our script over here, and we'll go through exactly what we're doing. So let's scroll down a bit. So as I mentioned, we have sort of the core thing with, we have a current card and a next card, and that's sort of the basic model we're using. And then the way this runs is it runs as a loop in the background. And we've done this before where I have a scripting loop, which it's sort of every half second it runs and checks on things. And what I can tell it to do is I can say, you can exit out now, you can go to the next, which is basically the 2 things we have set up here. And so I have to have some way of telling the script what to do. And I'm doing that through a dynamic value, dynamic value 1. And that is where I said, like, if it's 1, do this, if it's 2, do this, 3, do that. That's how we have that set up. So we're doing that in sort of the structure here. And that's what this action is for. It's what action we want to do inside our loop. We then have these 3 things, which are basically, I'm taking the directory and the file name, and I'm creating a video URI, a resource identifier that I can use. And so that's basically all I'm doing here is I'm combining those, and that's all set up there. And then I just have the input I return to when we're done, and that's sort of my camera shot. And so I just say, what input is that I want to do if I exit, or if we get to the end and I have no more to show. So cover all that. And now we're really getting into sort of the basic flow of logic now. And we start by initializing. So we got to get that first player out there, the first card in the deck. And that's all we do here. So we initialize, say the current card is the first card, and the next card is just one up from that. And we then start to manipulate all the things we see on the screen. So as I mentioned, we're using the main mix, which is in vMix scripting parlance, that is mix 0. So even though it sort of says on the UI mix 2 is mix 1, and the core preview and preset is mix 0. And that's how vMix operates in the scripting world. So what I'm doing first is I'm turning around and saying, if I have my player video showing, just put a blank in there. I don't, that's blanks that out. I wait to make sure that can go through. And then I'm just setting up all my data source rows. And we've done this before, and that's data source select row. And it's just going to say for the overlay, which is the data that I'm going to display about the player, that's the current card. For the card itself, the images and the titles and the logos and everything, that's also the current card. And notice these things are, again, this sort of a scripting thing. These are all zero based, zero referenced. So the current card, even though it's card 1, is the current card -1. So you're sort of starting at a 0 offset. That's just how scripting works with this. But that's what we have set up. So we have that, and we have the next card. And that's all set to get our data set, our data sources ready. And understanding the way we have it set up in the vMix preset is we have the titles for the card 1, card 2. Those are mapped to the corresponding data sources. So as soon as I do this, that updates all of the cards and the title that has all the player overlay data. So that's all now set. I turn the overlay input. We're using overlay 4 for this, so we turn that off so there's no text showing on the screen. And then we fade in deck 1, which is the current deck. That's where we have card 1 showing and card 2 sort of off to the side, ready to come down when I want to use that. So we get that all set up, and I put deck 2 in preview, so it makes it easy if I want to do the merge. I'm all set with that. And then what I'm going to do is I've got to get access to the file name of the player's video that I want to use. So if you remember in the data sources, that information is there, is the directory and the file name. So what I need to do, and this is an important point, I am using the vMix XML, sort of that core XML that vMix publishes. I need to use that to read out from the title what the URL for the URI for the video is, for the player video. And so that means I have a directory and the file name. So I need, right before I do that, so I've made all these changes. I've had different data source rows, and it's updated the GT titles with all those elements. But unless I do this, I don't have a current copy of all the changes I made up here. So I have to load the XML right before I go and do any of these types of functions. And so what I'm doing here is I'm going and basically selecting the XML out of the vMix XML. And we've done this, there are other shows we've done where we dove pretty deeply into how to work with these XML things. So I'm just pulling the out of this player overlay, which was that's the title with all the text on it. I'm pulling out the names for basically the video directory and the video file. So those are the two fields that I have set up, and that gives me that information. And so we're pulling that out and saving that as strings. This is the directory string, and that's the file name string. And so that's important that we do that load right before we get in to pull that information out. And then we just combine them here. So we turn around and say, if I combine the directory with the file name, that's the URI I need to work with it. And this is the function. It's called add input. So what we're doing then when we read that is we're adding our input here with the video file specified in our data source. And so this is that dynamic element. Now I can take and load any video file that I want and layer that in and do that all dynamically. And I can change it simply by changing my Excel spreadsheet. I don't have to do anything special and create new presets or any of that. It handles all that dynamically. And so the way it works is you have add input, and then you have a value, which is what is the file, what is the media that I want to associate with this add input. And you can look it up inside of sort of the vMix shortcuts, but there are all different things where if I want to do a video, I have to preface it with a video and a BAM, sort of that straight up and down bar. And then I say, what's the file name that I want to load? They have it for image. They have it for other things as well. But that's basically what this descriptor does. So it's going out there saying, add a new input, and it's a video file, and here's where you can find it. And that's how you structure this. But because I can read this now, that adds a whole new dimension to what I can do when I start to create graphic elements that I want to use a video with. And so keep that in mind. Now, this is terrible general programming practice, but in vMix scripting, it's sort of unavoidable. I have to give this time to actually load before I do anything. This is side effects programming. It's sort of frowned upon, but it's just a necessary evil. So this allows this file to get loaded as an input, and I sort of wait half a second and make sure that input is there before I do anything else with it. So now at this point, I have all the data sources set, and I have the video file loaded as an input. And so now all I'm going to do is just display everything now that it's all set. So I'm going to just make sure there's a blank sitting out there on top of where the video file that we just loaded will go. Because again, it's this mix one we're using. So we're doing all these things for the video file first. I do set the preview input to the video file. And I mentioned that the name of the input it creates when you do this add input is the name of the video file. So I'm just saying, find the input that has this video file name and put that in preview. I set it to loop and I start it playing so that video comes in motion. And then I turn on my overlay with the text, and then I fade in mix one. So I put the text up. So I already have the card up sitting on the side. I bring the text up, and then I fade the video in behind it. And so that's how we get that first guest out there, the first player out there. And there's a lot of individual steps, but if you think of it sort of in aggregate, it's a fairly straightforward set of steps. Then we go into our loop. So like I said, if we use an action command, so 0 means there's no action, just sort of loop. I'm not asking you to do anything. I set 1 for future. If we wanted to sort of go backwards in the deck or something, you could do that. Didn't add that code for the show. Then I just say show the next player is action 2, and then exit is action 3. So I start up and say, well, initialize it by setting the dynamic value to 0, because I don't want it to do anything when it goes into the loop. I just want to sit there and wait for me to tell it to do something. And so we do this, go into the loop. It's while true, so we'll just keep looping forever unless I exit out. I load the vMix XML, and then I pull what action do you want. So basically, I'm just extracting the dynamic value 1, very straightforward inner text, and I convert it to integer and say, what action do you want? And then I do, and this is something else we've done in the past, I do a select case statement. And that lets me basically block out logic to say, if action has a value of 0, do this, which in case is nothing. 1, again, nothing because it's future use. But now 2 is for, I want to put the next player card up. So this is the logic we do. And it's just going to do whatever is under this case. That's the code. So it's a nice way to sort of break up your logic without having to have all these different loops and other sorts of, if then else's to sort of figure it. It's sort of one macro. If I'm this, do this. If I want to do this, then do this. And so it's a very clean way to break up your code. So for case 2, which is our next, we do something that's sort of very similar. So first, I turn around and say, okay, you told me that you want to go to the next. So let me reset that back to 0, because I don't want the next time I loop to keep going through the next. I got to make sure that I reset the next action I want to be, don't do anything. So that's our first step. I then bump up what's my current card and my next card. So these get bumped up to the next cards. And then I turn off the videos. This is stuff we did before. And I wait for that because this is mix 1. And I'm saying, go back to blank, turn off that video playing in the background. Remove the input. So what I didn't want to do is when I go to the next card, I didn't want to keep adding new inputs into the vMix preset. So what I'm doing now is I'm using the sort of counterpart to the add input, which is remove input. And so with that, I know I'm not going to be on this guest on this player anymore. So I'm removing the video file, and sort of turning off the overlay. And because I already set the video file to blank, you don't see this on screen. I don't see the card just, pop out with the remove. So I turn off the overlay text, and now I say, let me select the value of the current card. And I'm doing that in my overlay, which is the title with all the text in it that I'm using. And I'm loading the vMix XML and then pulling out the directory values that we have. And one of the things we do is if we get to the end of this, in the directory, I just say exit. That's the value that I have in sort of the text. And let me just see if I can sort of pop this over so you can see it over here. So in here, that's this sort of my last statement here along here is the video directory says exit. So if I've made it all the way to the end, that's where this exit comes from. I see that my video directory is exit, so I know I'm at the end and I want to leave. So that's just give you that as sort of a reference here. So all I'm doing is saying if it is exit, then we've reached the end and sort of fade out and go to my return input and exit the while loop that we have. So that's what we do there. So I read the directory, then I read the file name, again, the same way we did before, construct the URI for where that video file is, and then we're sort of doing the same things that we did before. So I add the video file as a new vMix input, and that creates that new input that we just replaced, but with the correct video file. I set everything up for preview, loop, and play, all the things that we did when we started out. And then what I do is I do a merge, which takes and says, okay, I have deck 1 there. Now I merge in deck 2. It creates the animation. And then I start to layer everything out for that. So I have the card 1, which is the current card. That's set to the correct deck. There's a correct player in the deck. And then what I do is I go back and I replace deck 2 with deck 1 in the program out. And let me explain why I do that. So it's clear when I'm doing this that the deck, having deck 1 with the current card and then putting deck 2 with the next card, that gives you that nice transition. But then what I want to make sure I do is after that's up, because that next card, that deck, the card 2 overlays card 1 exactly in what you see on the program out. What I can do is I can take and say, let me swap deck 1 back in there again. So card 2, like my next card, is going to be off to the side. And this lets me sort of reuse the logic where now I get it, do the transition. And so because I have this here with the card in there, what I want to do is go back and say, okay, now that I have my next card showing, card 2, what I want to do is say, okay, let me put card 2, which is my current card now, into deck 1 and show that on screen so I can move deck 2 back here, and that gives me my next card can be in that sort of off-screen position ready to flip. So it creates a seamless transition, but lets me reuse those 2 inputs so I can sort of say, this is it showing, now move it back, and this is the next card ready. So when I do the transition, you see the flip, and then I sort of swap them out, and it keeps doing that. So it gives me that sort of circular way to leverage that. And that's what I'm doing here. So after I have that sort of transitioned out, then I can go and say, okay, now set card 2 to the next player card and get all that set. And that gives me a very clean transition. You don't even notice the fact that I actually am making a switch when you do this. And it may not be clear from my description because it's kind of hard to describe, but this would give you a clear way to sort of manage that. And at that point, then you're basically ready to do it again. So when I hit next, the same logic would apply. And then case 3 is just when I get out, I just turn around and say remove the input because we don't want to accumulate inputs and exit the while. And that's everything we do. And then I just turn my overlay off and switch to my return input when we exit the while. And that's it. So this is the overall logic. All of this is up in our repository for the show data, and there's a link in the show notes for this. So that should sort of cover everything. You can look through that. And hopefully if you have any questions, always, you can always feel free to contact me. But so let me jump. I think we have a couple more comments here that I want to. So Hakan is talking about BitFocus Companion can be an alternative to do less scripting and more stacking shortcuts in an intuitive way. So you have there are a lot of things. So you can do an awful lot in BitFocus Companion, and it's I definitely I don't use it a lot on anything I do here with the show, but it is definitely something if you haven't, you should check out. And it is Node.js. We did some Node.js shows, I think last season, to sort of cover some stuff. I wasn't sure that there was a lot of big interest, so we really haven't done much more with it, but I just did that sort of as an intro. So, it is basically letting you write code in JavaScript. And there are tons of reasons, like there's a lot in vMix scripting that you can't do, that you can certainly do with Companion if you wanted to do this. There isn't, to sort of talk more specifically, you could certainly do this as a sort of framework for what you want to do. If you wanted to use BitFocus Companion and do stuff in Node.js, you could certainly do this. And there are lots of different ways that you can handle this. So there, no one way, but I think Hakan has a very good point that, if you want to use this as a framework, I would definitely say go ahead, especially if you're comfortable with Node.js and you want to write logic for that. This was just more of introducing a couple of new functions, with the add input and remove input. And, that's just something that I thought could be interesting. So, the last thing Hakan says is, why not use a list input for all the player videos? You can, and that is another way. The only difference is that I wanted to be able to dynamically load any video I want. So in a list, sort of the way I would normally do this, and there's probably other scripting ways you can populate the list, but I would have to have everything sort of laid out in my list ahead of time. And that was, and I could be wrong. So I'm not, if I am misspeaking, I apologize. But I think you would have to have those sort of loaded ahead of time, and having the ability to put in this type of dynamic input where I just flip what I want in there based on what's in a file, I thought gave a slightly unique spin that has different types of use cases. So, if you had something that was set up where, say somebody is doing instant replay and they create these sort of special show reels that they could export, you may want to turn around and say, I want to create that as my backdrop with sort of the player highlights after a game, and could have that playing in the background as people talk over. So doing something like that, I think, could be interesting and give you some, different flexibility here. But, and I think the key point here, though, that Hakan is making is there's lots of different ways to do things here. And so I'm giving you the rationale for what I did, but I'm not saying that it's the right way or even the best way. It's just really, that was the approach I was taking with this. So hopefully that answers the question. Okay, so I know this was a more complex scripting show in some regards. There's funky things going on between, the data sources and the presets and everything in the scripting. But hopefully when you look at the code, after the show, it'll make more sense, and you may find things that are useful, for doing this. So let me just do a wrap up right now, and then we'll go into the post show, and I'll cover any other questions that are here. So thank you all. If you can join me for the post show, just hang around and we'll be back in a minute. If not, thank you very much. We are trying to do shows every other week, maybe every 3 weeks based on how I am at any given point in time. But so hopefully we'll do, another show or two inside of August, and we'll see you then. And if you can hang out for the show, for the post show, I'll see you in a moment. Take care, everyone. Thank you. Hello, everyone. Thank you for hanging out for our post show here. So there's a couple questions more that are up. So Michael was saying, it's the combination in the data manager where you get the data set for all fields and the overlay input. So the only reason I was doing it with multiples is that I wanted to be able to sort of easily populate card 1 and card 2 and the overlay, and not have them sort of, because clearly card 1 and card 2 are going to be different, even though they're driven off the same data. So when I used Data Source Manager and I just repeatedly did the loads, that was giving me a different way to effectively have multiple pointers into the same data set. And so that's why I structured it that way. And the overlay, which has all the data, that was I have a title for that, and that was the title I was reading that data out of. But yes, so this is this is basically how I was handling that. And so, at that point it was really just an option for how to approach this. And I thought it made some of the code simpler. I mean, there could have been ways I could have done it, sort of trying to read more data in Data Source Manager and have templates that had multiple rows of data sort of hidden in them. I just thought this was an easier way to do it, which is why I did it that way. So yeah, so Hakan is saying you can add and remove items and list inputs, and you probably need 2 or 3 as with the data sources. Yeah, so I think that's a good point, and it could make certain things easier. What you would have to do though is then you'd have to, and you could do this as opposed to the add input. For Hakan's point, I think it's very good. What you could do is you could take that same information that I'm reading out of the title with the player overlay, and that has the file name sort of hidden in the background. You could take that and you could then do a call to add that to a list, and that would become a video source in the list, and then you would be able to leverage that. So that's another very good way to handle this. And I appreciate the sort of the back and forth on this, because there's in some ways that may be a better approach than using the add input and remove input. In doing this, I was sort of just taken to say, what could I do with the add input and remove input? So a little bit of this was just showing off a function we hadn't covered before, a shortcut we hadn't covered before. But in terms of a practical implementation, using a list may actually be an easier and cleaner way to accomplish the same type of thing. But I think that the general concept, though, of taking and bringing a video in from sort of a file and using that inside graphics could be very, very powerful. And with sort of a layered input where you have some of them populated by GT title, and as Hakan's saying, others populated by a list as a layer, you could do some really interesting things and create dynamic graphics that sort of work against a list, just like we have here, a data source list, but drive the graphics dynamically with video, which was really sort of, as an approach, I think the interesting piece to what I was trying to cover here. So Tom, thank you for reminding me. The white mask input. Let me see if I can bring up the preset over here, the vMix preset, so we can take a look here. Yeah. So what I had here, so let me sort of show the background here. So here is the player, and so that you can see them over here as well. If I apply, what I was doing is inside of my mix, I went in and I applied this border, which was supposed to do this really nice soft edge. And I did that in the color key, and I said use the video mask, and I put that in. Let me for a minute just shut this off, because you do get some effect from it, and you get, so that covers the whole thing. So visually, though, what I was expecting was that it would make a really smooth, soft edge all along this, where you see sort of these harsher lines, like right there. If I were to add this key directly to the video, so where is that video mask? And said, okay, you can see now that that is all softened out for real. You know, I really have a nice, very smooth edge around this video in the background. That was what I was looking for originally. For some reason, if I did it directly inside the player video, it gives me the effect I was looking for. If I take it off of here and go back to none, and now put this back in the mix, and go here, you can now see that harsh line again. And it should be doing the same thing. So that was odd. So I don't know whether it's just something that isn't like fully supported inside of a mix, though the capability is sort of exposed there. But that was the difference. So I think you can see visually how the two look different. And you know, what I was hoping for was the first approach, where it had that very smooth edge, and it wasn't working. I also did not find that there was a shortcut to add that sort of mask, that fill mask, to an input dynamically. So even though I knew what it was, and I could have put it, I could specify the input because I know what the input is, there was no way to do that. So that was another piece that you know, definitely didn't work the way I was expecting. But actually, you know, the other possibilities sort of, let me, since Hakan was bringing this up, it probably would make sense. Let's go and we'll add a list. And let me add a video here. Let's see. I can just drag this in. So, okay, so we'll put this player here. So, let me see. Oh, did I not add it? Okay, so here is the list. Let me see if I put, let's put the list in here. If I put the thing in a list, would this work? And so let me just look at this index. So I'm just sort of going through this, and we're just playing with what we have here. So here is where I have the background video. If I just put the list we put in here. So actually, yeah, and then I'd have to soften it and everything. I didn't do any of that. But this would just give me, so if I do the list and I do the alpha in the list, go up here to adjust, pull the alpha down so it has that sort of soft view. And I look at this. So it isn't really giving me what I wanted here either. So it just looks different, and I'm not sure why when I do it to the video directly. So this just, now that I sort of tried it out. So, but that was something that, you know, that was what I was looking at, and it didn't look right. And so it seems to be something where if I'm doing it indirectly, it treats it differently than if I'm doing it directly on the source media. So I'll have to investigate that a bit more. Oh, let me see. Oh, hold on. I probably did it on the wrong one. I'm thinking as, so yes, I did it on the wrong one. So let me take a look here. Oh no, so that worked perfectly. So okay, so yeah, so it's something specifically with mixes. So okay, so this is actually exactly the effect I was looking for. So, you know, another route for doing this with a list instead of a instead of an add input, but that was the effect I was looking for. All right, let's see. So let's see. Michael's saying, I can't remember. Is a list of videos more memory intensive than changing the inputs? No, I believe it dynamically loads. Inside a list, it dynamically loads the one that's selected. So you're not tying up memory with other, inputs, because each of those inputs are live all the time. So that this would be more efficient. That was kind of the rationale I had with killing these inputs off. So you weren't just collecting a bunch of inputs, you were just using one at a time. So it effectively is giving you what you have in the list. So, again, that's another vote for, possibly doing this with the list, though it's just sort of an interesting function to be aware that you can add and remove inputs and structure them with different things you may need. So is it the text background? So actually, if you look at the layers we have here, I have these two layers here. So if it sort of shut things off. So we turn this off here. So what I have here, just to start, this is the background that I have, where this is the field that's sort of moving across. Then I have the lights that I put in there to sort of create that halo-ish effect around things. Then when I put the player video, you can see now that is, that does, because this is now based on the list, it does have that softening on the top and the bottom that I was looking for, and that works. So it isn't really, the text is the last thing, so that's the deck of cards. And then I have card 1 and card 2, and, they are basically just, card 2 isn't on the screen in deck 1. So, and then, that's everything. So these are all the elements. And then all I have for the text overlay is, that's just an overlay here. So that's a GT title. So, turning that on and off, it doesn't make a difference. So if I go back and set this up, let's go back to this and set this up as the mix instead of that, where you have the harsher line, having this on or off doesn't seem to make a difference at all. You still see that hard line there. So that was where that was coming from. So, but it doesn't look like it's the text itself that has anything to do with it. All right. So if there are any other questions, I'm happy to sort of dig in and explore that. So try to get them in. But, one of the things that I think is most important sort of as a takeaway from this is that, one, there are lots of different ways you can use merge. And so we show that in the last show where we just had the lower third where things could slide open and close. This is another example where I'm trying to do like a card laying on top of another card. So as you think of things, and we have a few more shows we're going to do, which will cover some other useful cases for the merge. But these are some of the things where I think you can sort of take and look at. The other thing that I think is one of the things I wanted to sort of emphasize is that you can start to think of using graphic elements along with traditional titles as layers in an input and do that dynamically. So you can sort of piece things together where if you wanted to create, special little video segments that sort of sit to the side of a textual lower third, which has static graphic elements, things like that, you can start to think that I can now drive this off of a data source and make it all dynamic and create a capability which isn't in GT title by itself. And I think that's one of the other powerful elements to consider in here is how can you improve the graphics that you present with more of these dynamic elements outside of just sort of GT title animations, which tend to be more for things coming on and off screen. This gives you actual high-end graphics, which can emulate what some very high-end title applications can do. And I think that gives you a lot more power inside of vMix as you think of this. So that's everything. Thank you, Hakan. Thank you for making all these suggestions. You made what I wanted to talk about so much better. So I appreciate that. Michael, thank you. Definitely appreciate all the participation and all the support for this show. So thank you all. And as I said, when we closed up the main show, I'm trying to do this every 2 to 3 weeks. So hopefully I'll be able to keep that until we're back into season 5, which I want to launch in the fall. So hopefully I'll be ready for that by then, and we'll have a lot of shows packed. But until then, sometime later this month, be safe, be well, and I'll see you. Take care.